Welcome, everybody, to the Existentialist Society in Melbourne, Australia. I'm David Miller. I'm the Secretary of the Society. Existentialism is an umbrella term covering and often conflicting, not agreed on who or what is an existentialist. We simply agree to disagree. Today's speaker is Brian Nelson, and his topic is an introduction to the philosophy of Karl Jaspers. Brian, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think first, maybe, can people see me? Let's see. Okay. Can people see me all right?
Yes.
Yep.
So I really appreciate this opportunity. I haven't participated yet in David's Existentialist Society, but I think I probably will in the future. Just have to get up or stay up a little later. But David's become to some other meetings that I've participated in. I've always appreciated his comments. He has a very wide-ranging knowledge, and his interests coincide a lot with mine. It's really quite a coincidence. I have been interested in Karl Jaspers for years. I've been reading his works in German, but I'm not a philosophy professor. I did maybe a little bit on my background. I did learn German right out of high school. I went to Germany as a foreign exchange student, and I've enjoyed reading German philosophy since then. I became a lawyer and then a professor in business ethics and business law at Purdue and University of Maryland in the United States. And I was a visiting professor in lots of different schools over in Europe, about 12 of them, and once at Australia National University in Canberra. I love Canberra. The coffee and chocolates were great, and there's a swimming pool right next to the Central Park. It's a great place to go. The architect who designed Canberra also did the street plan for Chicago, which is kind of just an interesting tidbit. I retired in 2015, and since then I've been doing a lot of reading in philosophy and religion, and picked up again on my interest in Karl Jaspers. Karl Jaspers has not received probably as much attention as he deserves in the English-speaking world, because he's somewhat difficult to translate, and he hasn't had really good translators, especially recently. On the other hand, there have been some biographies that have come out on him recently, and I've read those. Those I think are well done. Much of what I'm presenting today is coming from a biography written recently in Germany. I just like the way it organized his thought and laid it out. So I needed to pick something as a thread for my presentation, and that's what I picked. At the same time, this presentation is a bit idiocentric. It's not everything that Karl Jaspers said in his own words. After going, I have let's say an overview of his thinking and life, and in preparation for this meeting, I realized it's really quite impossible to present all that in a meaningful fashion in this context. So I decided to focus just on one or two ideas that I think are central to his work. From that, it's possible, in my opinion, it's possible to build out his other ideas. For example, I'm talking tonight about the two ideas, existence and philosophy. And they're very closely related. Existence, I think, is living reasonably as an individual, at least as Karl Jaspers would have it. And philosophy is part of that living reasonably. It helps you think about and test what is reasonable in a certain circumstance. So I guess you'd say from his perspective, at least as regards this presentation, you cannot live existentially unless you're living philosophically. And I'll talk now for most of the rest of the evening about that. The other concept I have in here is the encompassing. That's a term that he used. And I'll give you the German term later for those who like that sort of thing. And it could also be called, I guess, that's just the encompassing is what's beyond the horizon, what's beyond the pale of what we know or can know. And it's really, since we're focusing on existence this evening in the first instance, I would say it's the ontology or metaphysics, which is implicit in his understanding of existence. If you accept his definition or his presentation of existence, then much of what he says about the encompassing, I think, would be easy to accept. He certainly intended that way, that they complement each other. So I'll talk a little bit about that if we get to it. There are a lot of things I didn't talk about tonight, like truth. What is truth? That's a big topic for him. And communication, another big topic. Communication is very important for him. And now there are other philosophers now who focus on what they call communication philosophy. But a part of existence is that you don't really fully exist unless you communicate. And that's really the heart of the idea, and others have taken it and developed it. I think it's a good idea. There are another thing that comes up, I would say, a lot in his philosophy is that some of it is it can be viewed in two different ways, as either descriptive or prescriptive. In other words, this is descriptive, this is the way it is, whether you like it or not, and prescriptive is you'll do best if you get with the program and live like this. So those are the two different approaches or two different, if you will, lenses that you can use to look at much of what he's written, and I think that will come up this evening. So with that introduction, let's take a look. I'll put on the slides. Let's just see, maybe, David, let's see, does anybody have any questions or comments at this point? So I don't, maybe if you
use the raised hand facility, which you'll find in the reactions tab at the bottom of the screen.
Yeah, I'm not seeing everybody's face on this, but you could also, maybe the thing that's better to make sure I catch everybody, go into chat, the chat across the bottom, and then type exclamation in the message, and then hit enter, and then I should be able to catch everybody. And I don't see anybody right now, so I'm gonna go ahead. and start sharing the screen.
Tim has
Oh,
indicated he'd like to ask a question.
okay. Let's see. Tim, right. Do I have to do anything then, or can you just go ahead?
He should be able to just go ahead, providing he's unmuted.
Okay. Need to no, sorry, error. So no question. The all right. Anybody else? Okay. Joe
Joseph has
James
got his
Cook.
hand up.
Okay. Oh yeah, the hands pop up to the
So Brian,
so that's good.
yeah. So I just want to just see actually what was Karl Jaspers like philosophy of life specifically? Did he subscribe to one particular like school of thought? I don't know much about him, but you talked about how philosophy actually you was required, was essential to in finding meaning and purpose in his life.
Right. That's a really very good question. And no, he did not subscribe to any school.
Okay.
And he developed his own understanding of philosophy, which he saw more as an activity than a conclusion or set of guidelines. Beyond that, he challenged each person to investigate, in addition to communicating with other people who are trying to think and act reasonably. He encouraged people to read philosophy, going back in history, and then to use that as a kind of a discussion, a dialogue to flesh out and refine each person's philosophy. And each person's philosophy manifests itself not just in the communication, because I think he does challenge you to be able to articulate your reasoning. And the reasoning I think he's most interested in is why you do things. But to be able to articulate your reasoning and then to act on that in your life. And as we'll see, we're anticipating here a bit, in some ways, everybody's life is the same. We'll talk about that. And in some ways, this is all according to Jaspers, everybody's life is different. And because everybody's life is different to some extent, their philosophies can be different. His approach has been criticized as being too relativistic, but I think pointing to philosophy and the history of philosophy and challenging people to communicate about their philosophy is a puts some kind of rudder on that lack of direction that he gives as to what is philosophy. But everybody's challenged to develop his or her own. And he's saying, hey, also, that's just the way it is. That's what people do in life, whether they think about it or not. And the challenge is, or the opportunity is to think about it and to be able to articulate it. And that's what philosophizing is.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else?
James?
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I'm really excited. This is great because I'm very uneducated about Jaspers' philosophies in general. I know he developed the concept of the worldview, which I'm sure you're going to talk about. I happen to be in the middle of reading the correspondence between Heidegger and Jaspers, and I was just wondering what if you have any information on their relationship, or even the relationship between Jaspers and Edmund Husserl. because I don't know anything about that. I do know that Heidegger had an educational relationship with Husserl as a PhD student, but I don't know if that was true for Jaspers. And so that's all. Just any. I'm interested in any of those connections. If you have any information about them, thank you.
Yes, I do. I really haven't spent any time on that and didn't plan on touching on it too much this evening, but I will say, I guess, my opinion up front, I think Heidegger's the bad boy of these German existentialists, and Jaspers is the good boy. Heidegger was a Nazi, and Jaspers was persecuted by the Nazis. Heidegger's book fell into Sartre's hands when Sartre was a prisoner of war in a Nazi camp in World War II. That would have been impossible for a Jaspers book because Jaspers' publications were suppressed by the Nazis. He was a full professor in Heidelberg. Jaspers was a full professor in Heidelberg but was dismissed in 1937 because he was married to a Jewish woman. And Heidegger became the rector of Freiburg University by embracing the Nazi agenda and helping to implement it there. So I've read Heidegger's commentary on Nietzsche. Let's say it runs 13, I forget how many chapters, 13, 14 chapters. I read it in German and in English. The interesting thing is that in the English translation, they left out one of the chapters. It's the one on technology and progress, Heidegger's Technology and Progress. And the reason he left it out is he sounds so much like a Nazi in that chapter. It's amazing. He even uses the word blood and soil, Blut und Boden, which is a buzzword for the Nazis. And so it's I don't know what's going on there, maybe, but if you're trying to sanitize Heidegger, you'd want to leave out that chapter. The relationship between the two. Heidegger grew up in Southwest Germany and was an altar boy, and his education was sponsored by the Catholics, and he was going to become a priest until kind of falling out with them. I think really because he had a little trouble with the religion. He just couldn't embrace it the way it was necessary. But that was supposed to be his career path, and then he got into philosophy. The Jaspers comes from northern Germany in a Protestant family, which was not religious at all, and he never became religious. The Jaspers was an established professor before Heidegger, and as these things go, in these I'm just telling you now what's in the biographies. So I don't know if you really can trace all of this back so well, but they certainly talked to each other. They planned on publishing a magazine together on existentialist type topics, but that project never took shape. I'm not sure that Jaspers really promoted Heidegger's career, but he was supportive of the work that Heidegger was doing, at least in his early works in the 1920s. And but he was Jaspers was his senior. He was more established at an earlier date than Heidegger. Another thing in my mind that makes Heidegger the bad boy and Jaspers the good boy is that Hannah Arendt was a student of both of them. Heidegger had a years-long extramarital affair with Hannah Arendt, and even tried to convince his wife, again, according to the biographies, that they should have a ménage à trois. And his wife didn't go for that. Heidegger transferred or recommended Hannah Arendt to Jaspers for the purpose of supervising Hannah Arendt's PhD thesis. And so he did that. And all of that happened before Jaspers was dismissed in 1937. And then, Hannah Arendt moved to the United States, and she maintained contact with both of them. I'm not sure I can really quantify, but I would say that the work that she did with Jaspers was very substantial. She took one of his later works, which is the History of Philosophy, 4-volume History of Philosophy, and translated it into English. It's, thousands of pages, maybe 2,000 pages altogether. And that's one reason a lot of some American academics would say that he's most known as a historian of philosophy, because that's the most important thing that's been published in English. But I don't think that's his most important work, and I don't think he considered it his most important work. It was his last big work that kind of was a capstone to all the things he had done, because he thinks that reading philosophy and interacting with the great minds of history is an important part for living your life reasonably. I don't really, and then she and he collaborated on the work of Hannah Arendt's work on the Eichmann trials, which became rather notorious. It's I think I haven't read it yet. I plan on reading it, but I think it was a good work. It's one of her introductions to totalitarianism that she spent more time writing about. Honestly, I think that Hannah Arendt is more in line with Jaspers than Heidegger, because Heidegger was totally on board with the totalitarian Nazis. He was rehabilitated in the German universities in 1961. Heidegger was. And the reason he was rehabilitated is that Sartre was becoming so popular, and Merleau-Ponty, very well known in France. So people were studying Heidegger in France, and they thought it's ridiculous. The German universities somehow thought it's ridiculous that you can study Heidegger in France, but you can't study him in Germany. So he was rehabilitated, allowed to teach again in Germany. I believe the date was 1961. And he gave an interview for Spiegel magazine on that occasion. One reason was that he was given the opportunity to recant the things he said as a Nazi, and he did not do that. So Heidegger's not my favorite guy, and Jasper is. I'll just put that out there up front. I hadn't planned on getting into that at all this evening, but it's a fair question. Anybody else?
John Nowak has got his hand up.
Okay.
Right, yes, I've just unmuted myself. I'm just comparing the pre-war Second World War and the post-war situation. If I think of my father, he had tremendous, as a German Lutheran pastor and in German Lutheran theology and German culture and all that sort of thing. He was lived through the Olympics, which of course were generally favourable to Hitler on a popular level. And then there were these road projects. And I recall my father saying that he used to listen to Hitler's speeches, and, he was doing a lot for the country. And I noticed on some photos of him, he actually wore a Hitler moustache. But yet, before the Second World War, there were a lot of people that were admiring the situation in Germany, and I sometimes think we're a little bit too critical. I mean, I'm a post-war. I was born 1944, and we can look back and sort of see Hitler as a great monster, taking into account the millions that he killed or was responsible for killing. But I just wonder whether we've, the talk that's going on here today, is tending to very easily find the positive and negative characters, in Germany. And of course, if they have any Nazi connection, well, they're immediately totally negative. I'm just wondering if you'd like to comment on whether we should perhaps have a fairer picture and try to put ourselves in the context of the pre-Second World War to get a more balanced picture of what actually went on.
Well, I think, yeah, it's absolutely true that, some of the things the Nazis did, especially at the beginning, were positive on the economic and even the cultural level, although I, tiptoe carefully into that area, in that he
I'm sorry, would it be possible to go ahead and get the presentation on Jaspers? Would that be possible? Because I know many of us are here to listen to your presentation.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's probably a good idea. I hadn't really planned on getting into any of this at all anyway. But,
well, that's fine. I mean,
yeah, I think the real distinction is between the totalitarian and the democratic. And I would just point, in my opinion, both Sartre, who supported the Soviet Union after World War II, and Heidegger, who never recanted his Nazism, had a blind spot for totalitarianism. Maybe we can just leave it at that.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Karl Jaspers, there's a lot. Thank you for that. There's a lot with Karl Jaspers. Okay, I think I have my slides up. Everyone should be able to see that. And I'm gonna do my slides. I'm gonna talk to the slides, and I'll probably read them in the first instance, but I'll have comments on them. I'll go slide by slide, and at some, when I consider it appropriate, I'll stop and we can discuss. And if anybody wants to interrupt in between, you're welcome to do that. An essay on Karl Jaspers' Concepts of Existence and Philosophy. So an essay is an attempt. This is an attempt. And as I said, I've made a lot of decisions and choices and selections in putting this together. It is not a comprehensive presentation. I've really focused on the parts of Jaspers' works which most people would associate with existentialism. There are other parts of his work which are associated, but not clearly and centrally associated in the way these were the concepts this evening are. So there's really much more to what he's done. He was very active, not to get back into the history, but he was very active in Germany after World War II, because he was brought back in to help by the Allies to help rehabilitate the German universities, and was active in doing that after World War II. So there was a lot of other things going on. All right. And also the other thing is, I'll go back to the title here. You'll see in a minute, I stopped his biography in 1937, because there's so much already by 1937, and his essential ideas, I think, were already well formed at that time. So yeah, we could pick up after 1937, and it wouldn't be an unfamiliar presentation, but it would be different. The capabilities, I've subtitled it Capabilities and Opportunities. The capabilities, that's what exists within you. And opportunities are what exist outside of you. The he actually doesn't use exactly those words. For opportunities, he uses the word situation. But I like to use the word opportunity, just honestly, just to be a little more positive about it. The freedom, responsibility, and reason. This is where the prescriptive and descriptive come into play. He would say that, as a matter of fact, everybody is an individual, fundamentally an individual. As that individual, they have freedom, they have responsibility, and they should apply reason to their action in these contexts. So again, a bit of a very quick summary. His key idea is, here's a German word, Selbstvergessenheit, which is it's a compound substantive. It's a long noun that Germans like to use, but it's really, the idea is that we have forgotten who we are. And he used this term. This is one term that he used, not his biographers, because Heidegger said he didn't talk about Selbstvergessenheit. He talked about Seinsvergessenheit, that we have forgotten what being is, which is more of an ontological exploration. And this, we have forgotten who we are, is more of an existential, or what might be called an existential investigation. And his conclusion is, you are a bundle, these are, in my words, you are a bundle of capacities, capabilities in a world of opportunity. And one thing about the way I put this presentation together tonight, I've always used you, so the second person pronoun, because I think Jaspers does try to speak directly to the individual, directly to you, not like people are bundles of capacities, or he, she, and it are, or they are. He's really trying to convict us to think about these ideas in real terms for ourselves. And so I've used the second person to do that this evening. These are the topics: Jaspers' life and times until 1937, origin of the term existentialism, then what is it? Somebody raised their hand. What is existence? What is philosophy? And then the encompassing. I've touched on all those a little bit. Let's hear what the question is. You can unmute, I guess, and ask your question.
Yeah, hi. So I just want to respond to the charge that, Heidegger never apologized for his, fascist past, and Sartre supposedly, was a supporter of totalitarianism, and he did make
definitely
some
supported the Soviet Union.
No,
before,
he did. He
before
made
the
some
Hungarian...
really over-the-top statements, supporting the Soviet regime for a few years, which, it's a complicated picture, his own psychology. He had been extremely apolitical at one time, and he probably overcompensated for that. And basically, philosophers and political judgment usually don't mix very well. But the 1956, crushing of the Hungarian uprising, he moved away from that regime very quickly. And, he's not responsible for the, whatever a regime thousands of miles away is doing, whether they're even aware of him. He made some supportive statements. He never was a member of the Communist Party in France, which enjoyed great prestige and had a huge membership based on their resistance to Nazi rule. So it's a complicated picture, but I think we should be careful when, somebody who is directly responsible for ruining the lives of others, including his own mentors, and supporting a regime, his own regime, which murdered millions, as opposed to somebody making some rhetorical gestures. To me, there's a big difference.
Okay, but that's great. I don't disagree with anything you said. But as one of the attendees commented, I had not planned on getting into that at all tonight. Any of that, because I don't think it's really essential to what I'm trying to present today. And it might be good to get the basics of Jasper out on the table. And then if you want, we can come back to some of those other topics, but there really is a lot in of substance in Karl Jaspers himself without too much on his the context. Okay. So I've commented about already what is existence and philosophy. They're very closely related, and the encompassing is, if you will, if we're going to start with the term existence, the encompassing is implicit, an implicit understanding of the nature of being. If you get on board with his understanding of existence, they complement each other. Okay, now hopefully we can just go through this because I just want to make without too much on the context, the reason I want to go through this is that Nietzsche once said, if you want to be a philosopher, first you need to be a scientist. And Jaspers was a scientist. He was a psychiatrist and did really some groundbreaking work as a psychiatrist before he got into psychology, and then psychology led him into philosophy. And I'll explain a little bit how that worked now. The very first point we can go over quickly. He was born in Northwest Germany, died in 1883, died in 1969. I think died in 1969. He studied law for 3 years and then switched to medicine because he thought medicine would give him the best handle on a scientific handle on the nature of human life. And he did earn his doctorate in medicine in 1908 and then specialized in psychiatry in 1913, which is really at a very early age for him. He published the General Psychopathology. That is a big work, which is still discussed today. And it's very similar in the scope and purpose to the current diagnostic and statistical manual of mental disorders. So there's a lot of discussion among the psychiatric community. What really are the disorders? What are the symptoms? What are the causes? A lot of discussion about that. And that is sorted out in the preparation of this manual of mental disorders. It's an ongoing work. I think there's one now that's certainly been superseded since 1952. I forget when the last one was. Probably it's certainly after the turn of the century. I think it's after 2010. But this Allgemeines, the general psychopathology, Jaspers wrote that all by himself, and he had the support of a professor to do that, plus a publishing house that that funded, in effect, sponsored his work. So Jaspers wrote the General Psychopathology with the sponsorship of a philosophy professor at Heidelberg University. And the reason for that is that psychiatry and psychopathology within the university context were treated in the philosophy department at that time. So there wasn't a separate, that was the appropriate place for him to be doing that kind of work. And upon its publication, he was immediately appointed as a professor of psychology. So moving a bit away from psychiatry. In 1919, so 6 years after 6 years as a philosophy professor, he published The Psychology of Worldviews. And this is, I didn't spend a lot of time on that for this evening. I've looked at it before, but it's a typology of all the different ways you can think about the world. And if I had to summarize it, each of the different views would evaluate the same world in a different way. So there'd be introverts, extroverts, just like, there are Steelers fans and Yankees fans, and all these people have different views of the world. We could spend, if you want, I could do another presentation on just that. It is a huge work and really very interesting. But it was one of the things he touched on was the philosophical view of life. And so he later characterized this work as his earliest writing in existence philosophy, the philosophy of existence. Of course, that's looking back. He's using this term at a later date. So as with the general psychopathology was for psychiatric purposes, this one, which is more of a psychological purpose, is an attempt to provide a comprehensive framework. It's really quite impressive, at least to me. And in this case, the framework is developed for understanding the ways in which different people perceive and understand reality. The summary, and this is my summary: different people, all acting honestly in good faith, evaluate the same facts differently. In other words, different people have different truths. Some differences in truths are based on different perceptions, and some are based on different values. It's interesting what he wrote about this book, because he said he was intrigued by the fact that even in the scientific community, remember it's started out in the sciences, people had very different interpretations, understanding, and conclusions based on the same facts. And he was trying to sort out how could that be, and came up with this work. The other thing I will say is that at this point, he was a good friend, and I'd even say under the influence of Max Weber, under the support and supervision influence of Max Weber, who was a very influential professor in Heidelberg in the 1920s. He was really the founder of modern sociology, and he came up with, Max Weber came up with a typology for different things, like typologies for governments and typologies for leadership and typologies for economies, very similar to the kind of typologies that Jaspers came up with here. So I think I'd have to investigate more, but I think that Jaspers was clearly influenced by Max Weber's work in putting together this psychology of worldviews. And then after he published this in 1922, he was appointed a full professor in philosophy at Heidelberg. These are both big, big works, long and influential. Okay, and between 1922 and 1931, in addition to his lectures and shorter publications, Jaspers prepared the publication of his 3-volume Philosophie, so just philosophy. And the purpose of philosophy is to answer the question, what is philosophy? And this presentation here tonight is my attempt to summarize Jaspers' answer to that question. But here's some preliminary remarks that I've pulled out of biographies. So these are all quotes from Jaspers. Philosophical thinking makes you aware of yourself. So it's just like Socrates, know yourself. Philosophy achieves its results as you contemplate it. So reflection is a very important part of his philosophy, reflecting on your experience. philosophy awakens the forces within you. At the end of the day, he calls philosophy as mere speculation unless you put it in practice. And so it gives direction to the forces within you. Okay, and here's others under the other comments he's made to kind of kick things off. Your self-expression, which is you in the world, is a necessity for your internal evolution. In other words, you do need to act in the world to evolve. And this evolution in the right circumstances is what he calls existence. So it's a becoming, it's a growing, it's a development, but done in a certain way. And I use the word, it's important, the word self-expression here. I don't remember exactly the word he used, but self-expression, because it's not necessarily the result you obtain. The result you obtain will continue to inform you as regards your further works and your further action, but the self-expression is something that you control yourself, and self-expression is more within your realm of freedom. And so he's focusing on that self-expression. Okay, you search for the second quote, you search for individual your search for individual meaning is, and then I put in brackets, should be an integral part of your philosophical program. Because what he's saying is, this is the prescriptive and descriptive difference. Whether you like it or not, you have a philosophy. And as you search for meaning, and whether or not you know it, you are searching for meaning. The philosophy, in other words, your reasons for doing things are a part of that search. And then he goes on, I think, to suggest that that's the way it should be. You should be aware of that, conscious of it, even be able to articulate it as you're doing it to the best of your ability. And then also vice versa, that your philosophical program should be an integral part of your search for individual meaning. So these things go hand in hand. Existence and philosophy go hand in hand. And then existence is manifested only in the loving struggle between your own self-evolution and others' freedoms. In other words, between your own self-evolution and the evolution of others. And beyond that, he goes on to suggest that you don't want, not only you don't want to interfere, but if you can, you try to promote the evolution of others. Okay, Jaspers' life and times until 1937. There are two very important lectures that he gave. And I'm giving this for people who want to follow up a bit more. These have been translated. The second one is still in print. In 1935, he gave lectures at Groningen in the Netherlands. It's not that important, I guess, where he gave them. But the name of it is Reason and Existence. And this is his first attempt to lay out for a general public his understanding of existence and philosophy. Reason, again, is that guiding principle that really is the rudder for your will as you act in the world. And then again, he did the same thing in 1937, and this is considered important. I've read both of these several times. It's considered, I thought I might actually translate one of them because they're not, this second one has been translated for decades. And the other one's not necessarily well done. But it says, it was delivered in 1937, and this was after he had been told he was going to be dismissed. But the lecture was already set up, the publication of his lectures had already been arranged. So all that went through, and then that was really the end of his public works until after World War II. And so he knew that, and he tried to give a good summary of his current thinking at that time, and a comprehensive summary of his thinking at that time in 1937. All right, here's the origin of the term existentialism. Since the mid-1920s, Jasper used the term Existenzphilosophie in his lectures. He was already lecturing in Heidelberg as a reference to the philosophy of Kierkegaard. Jaspers did not, this is in his Jaspers' own writings, Jasper did not consider this use of the word Existenzphilosophie to be a first use. Probably had heard others using it, and he didn't think it was that important. In 1937, remember, he published his, well, he started writing his existence, his 3-volume book, which was eventually called Philosophy. And the first suggestion of a title to this book was Existenzphilosophie. And he rejected that because he thought it was too constricting and too vague at the same time. He thought, well, you'll see what he thinks Existenzphilosophie meant. In 1929, Fritz Heinemann used the term Existenzphilosophie in this periodical, and I give you the citation here. And Heinemann claimed that he had the first use and that the first use was in this article, but that's probably not true. I read a very long footnote in one of the biographies that goes for, in small print, of more than a half a page, with all the other citations in which Existenzphilosophie was used at that time in different scholarly and other publications. So it was a term that was out there, and I think used in different ways, just like in my experience, words like transcendence are used in many different ways by many different people. All right, in 1937, Jasper and the term Existenzphilos used the term to mean thinking about the human situation in a philosophical manner. And he didn't use the word human, I didn't get that spelling right, human situation. He used the word mention, which is people, to think about people in a philosophical manner. And then in 1932, Jaspers used the term in his Philosophie. A whole section of his Philosophie is on Existenzphilosophie. He used it to refer to the current philosophical trends, but he insisted that the current philosophies or philosophizing were simply new forms of original philosophy. So he's not saying, or he is saying, that there's nothing new in what we're doing. We're just doing what philosophers have been doing through the ages. But because the circumstances are different, and because the science has evolved, remember he's a scientist, the way we approach these things is different. The way we approach philosophy is different. Then in 1937, Jaspers used the term Existenzphilosophie as the title of his last lecture before his dismissal. And he intended the term to have the meaning given in the 1932 volume. In other words, the current philosophical life as a continuation of philosophical traditions. Okay. Eventually, between World War II and 1956, according to Jaspers, again, he wrote a little piece on the history of this word. He said that the word Existenzphilosophie was used as a dismissive term to attack contemporary philosophy to the extent that it did not rely on logic or tradition. And that by now, by 1956, the term had taken hold with that rather dismissive meaning. When I read this, I was reminded, I used to teach at Purdue, their nickname or mascots, the Boilermakers. That initially was a dismissive term that was made up by the University of by Indiana University, the Hoosiers. They ridiculed Purdue, the Purdue team, as being Boilermakers, just engineers, and but the Purdue embraced it, and that then became their mascot. Okay. So, and Jaspers again said in 1956, and this is a quote, even though all the authors, he used the word authors, philosophers who are viewed as the inaugurators of existentialism are opposed to it, the term survives as a phantom under which the most different philosophers are seen as the same. And that's probably, I mean, I would agree with that. All right, now maybe I should stop there and see before we get into existence, if there are any questions or comments. James Cook. Go ahead. Let's see, I'm not hearing it. I don't know if anybody else is. Is there something I need to do?
Me. It was me. Sorry.
There you go.
Okay, so I was just wondering if there's anything. Are you going to say anything about what Jaspers did after being dismissed from the university in 1937?
Well, he
in general.
continued to research and write. He did, but the details of that I haven't really prepped for tonight. If people are interested, I could prepare that, because I found this all very interesting. I mean, I've known all this stuff for a long time, but I've never sat down to put it in order, and I found that very rewarding. So if people are interested, I could do more after 1937. But I'm really he can tell you he didn't teach and he didn't publish. He did research and he did writing on his own. And he was set to be taken away to a concentration camp in May, but the Americans liberated Heidelberg in April. And so he was saved. That's,
1945.
Yeah, that's what I remember.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Anybody else?
Go ahead,
Yeah.
Joseph. Go ahead.
Joseph
Yeah,
Bullock?
just very, yes, nice to see you, Brian.
Hello?
Really quickly, you said he incorporated Heidegger into some of his teachings, or the reason why I asked that is that I was wondering if he had a way of categorizing individuals like Kierkegaard did, in the sense that where he would say something like the aesthetic life, or the night of resignation, or the night of faith. And I mean, and because he mentioned everybody had a philosophy of life, whether they knew it or not. But did he have a way of actually, kind of grouping individuals as far as the types of philosophies that they actually practice? Because obviously some are probably filled with contradictions, I would say, especially if you're not necessarily cognizant of what you're doing.
He did write, I'd have to look back what he wrote on Kierkegaard. But to answer your question, yes, he did work on the history of philosophy. And I mentioned that briefly at the end here today, but he does draw differences in different types of philosophies. He did it very systematic. He did it systematically. I don't have all of that at my fingertips right now, but he saw, for example, Hegel as being an idealist, promoting an idea, and that the idea, I'm just giving you an example now, that the idea which is the phenomenology of the spirit. The spirit, the zeitgeist, you've probably heard of, is an ideal which controls a communitarian ideal or a collective idea that controls individual fate or individual lives. And so I don't think that Jaspers really embraced that kind of idealism. I'd have to look back, but at Marx he included in that. Probably Christianity. I don't know about that. I can't really recite on all this. He spent more time studying religion during and after World War II. He spent a lot of time on the difference between religion and philosophy. Somebody asked that during and after World War II. And I have some of that in my mind, but not all of it right now. And he did a lot of work. He had discussions, he had joint publications with theologians. He was really interested in that after World War II. But yes, he had different philosophies and he would break them down into different groups. For example, I'm not sure this is a type, but he pointed out that Descartes, now that's more of a rationalist philosophy, and Descartes was trying to focus on certainty. What can we know with certainty? And so Descartes' saying was, I think, therefore I am. So I know with certainty that I am because I'm thinking. And I guess if I were to try to simplify what Jaspers and I think other existentialists are getting at, this is something I think Heidegger and Jaspers agree on. They'd turn that around. They'd start out with I am and I think. So the premise is that I exist. It's not to create certainty. That's not what they're trying to do. So they're just very different approaches to philosophy. He said that Jasper said that and I think this is true. Aristotle said that the beginning stroke or the origin or source of philosophy is the wonderment that a person has at the world. And Jasper said it's the shock you have of living in the world. There's an awakening that occurs when you're alive, and that's the source of philosophy. So I don't think that's a very good answer, but it talks around what you're saying. And also the world views is another way to get at it, but it's not really philosophical. It's because it's not as disciplined as he would like to see. So these different psychological views, I think, pick up on everything that's not really well reasoned and articulated. Anybody else?
Yes. Thank you for the presentation. I'm interested in what Jaspers had to say about living an authentic existence. So it seems to me that there are, I guess this is kind of fairly basic description, but there are two sort of basic sides to existence. There's the inner self, and then there's the outer. So I forget what the term was. Encompassing the outer situations, and that living an authentic existence is kind of trying to find some sort of middle path between the two.
Well, I think I think Jaspers would say the authentic existence is realizing that we are individuals. That's number one. As individuals, we are necessarily free. It's number two. As individuals, we're necessarily responsible for what we do. And then I would say he goes beyond that to say, you realize all this, you act in accordance with it, and since you realize, this is what makes it authentic, you realize it, you act in accordance with it, and you take it seriously. To take it seriously means you try to behave reasonably. And to behave reasonably, you're going to do at least two things. You're going to talk to other people who are also serious people who are trying to live reasonably, and you're going to read philosophy. And if you're living inauthentically, he'd say there are certainly at least two parts to that. Number one, you're living a life which is not consistent with the facts. So he's a scientist. And he's saying modern philosophy needs to change from the classical because science has evolved. Science is better, actually. We know more. And the philosophy needs to it needs to evolve in a manner consistent with science. And then the second thing he says, although I think this evolves after World War II, is that to live authentically, you cannot delegate your freedom or responsibility to any authority. So that would be the state or the church, for example. And these institutions have risen up based on idealistic philosophies. They're focusing on the community. They're not authentic.
Well, I think that sounds easier said than done. To not delegate any authority to the state or to the church, but I guess it's
So
I mean the
that's what I
idea of
said.
encompassing.
I would agree with you. And I'd have to. I can't cite you the works in which he did this or the context in which it evolved, but I think that after World War II, he agreed with you, and so somebody like Kierkegaard, who did, embrace Christianity, although he did not embrace the church, he accepted that as an authentic way of living because he did that. Kierkegaard embraced Christianity in accordance with these steps that I outlined. And you could do the same thing with a government. But I think there's probably, for both of them, there's limits. Totalitarianism, is kind of a non-starter for him. He's very much a Democrat.
Guys, go ahead.
Yeah, just really quickly, just brief question to follow up from that. So does he have like any idea, like kind of concept of duty, moral duty, as far as incorporated to his philosophy? If you're not beholden to the state, you're not beholden to the church, then really, then is there any kind of obligation that you do have other than to yourself?
Yeah, I guess the easiest answer is one that I'm certainly comfortable with is that you have your duty to other individuals. and to their right to existence, to free expression, full development. So I think I would actually think that it's probably a good point based on the stuff through 1937. He really does not talk a lot about, mediated, this sort of freedom and responsibility being mediated through institutions. It's more a person-to-person thing. I think with the
Thank you.
well, over time, I think he's had to come to terms with it, because I know that he did work on totalitarianism and he did a lot of work on religion, but I'd have to look back and prep that to present it. That's in his later work. But I don't think he's ever departed from the fundamental approach that I've given you. He's found accommodation for it along the lines that the other questioner indicated, and now along the lines that you've indicated. There's an anecdotal story that Jaspers and Heidegger met after World War II, and they were walking in the forest, which is what Heidegger liked to do. And they were sitting looking at a church, and Heidegger just kind of shrugged his shoulders and said, well, you have to respect them. And I think they kind of agreed on that point, that there's something to these institutions. Any other questions? All right, let's do existence. This is a definition of existence that I evolved after working through several texts, biographical and philosophical. I tried to put it in terms that were brief and clear and that made sense to me, hoping that they would make sense to you. All right, we have Ocean. Ocean has a question. Let's do that before we get started.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I just joined late, so I missed some of your presentation, but as for their statement that you have to respect other people's right to exist, that's fine. That's easy to say it, but I believe he's not a communist. He's for the free market. And let's say if you are my economic competitors, and let's say if I was the CEO of a large corporation and you are the CEO of my competing companies, then my job is to steal as much customers from you and destroy your existence in the free market, right? So how does this fact reconcile with the notion that you will respect other people's right to exist economically in the free market?
Yeah, so I think those are all good points. Everybody there, the last three questions have all raised good points about, and I just don't see Jaspers addressing those issues before 1937. I'm happy to look and see if there's, I know he's addressed some of them after 37, and look and see what he said about the economic also. But yeah, you could say, I guess, either he's, has a different focus. I think he clearly has a person-to-person focus up through 1937, and at least in his published works. And but you could, that's one way to look at it. And a lot of very, I think, interesting, useful things have come out of that. But then you could say he neglected these institutional and social implications, and that's rather naive. But
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
It's not.
And also, yeah,
It's not a. You know, I
also,
don't. It's not complete. For example, he doesn't. He doesn't talk a lot about developing habits as part of virtues. There's a lot of things he does not get into.
yeah, but I have a question. A question along the similar line. You 5 minutes ago, you said that one of his ideas is to respect other people, especially who is trying to be reasonable, trying to pursue his goals and contribute to society. But from the certain angles, that's exactly what Adolf Hitler tried to do by trying to create a utopia by eliminating what he thought was the human weeds to create a perfect utopia to save the humanities. Oh, of course, I don't agree with it. I have many Jewish friends, and I disagree with it. But in his mind, that's exactly what he did. Then who is there anybody who can judge him like a god? I don't think there is.
Well, you know, here this evening and really in any context, we're using just very few words to talk about these things, but I can assure you that Jaspers was opposed to Nazism. I'm not trying to get into, you know, if there's anything good or bad about Nazism. I'm just telling you he was opposed to Nazism. Okay. And if you're trying to find an inconsistency between what he said and his opposition to Nazism, I'm not sure I see it.
Okay, so in other words, you would respect other people as long as that other people's ideology or idea is along with yours, and you would oppose if other people have a different idea than yours.
Well, I think that if you want to dictate your ideology for other people, yes, then he would oppose that. So I think generally, you know,
thank you.
I think generally he's not on board for these idealistic philosophies. Whether it's market capitalism or communism or Catholicism or Protestantism, any of that stuff.
Thank you.
Okay, here's existence. Existence is the evolution of yourself through your own individual, independent reflection, reasoning, communication, decision, and action on the basis of your experiences. This is all very individualistic. And then once the cycle is completed, it begins again based on the new experiences you've had arising from your actions. So you're learning by doing. And and you'll see later, so also your philosophy can evolve. Your articulations of values and the rest, they'll evolve over time. You shouldn't expect them to be the same throughout your life. Or you shouldn't expect other people's to be the same as yours. Okay, the next point, existence. I'm not using the German word existence. This evolution of yourself, when I say this, I'm referring to the definition above. So evolving in a certain way, involving these steps, usually begins with an event involving you in the world, which shakes you in your understanding of yourself. You are shaken because your own way of showing up no longer works in the world in a manner or to the extent that you expect or desire. So honestly, this is really similar to what Jordan Peterson says about I forget what the word he uses, but the dragon of the unknown. And a lot of people see the unknown as scary, and you know, it can you can slap you in the face or punch you in the nose, and that's what Jaspers here is talking about. But that's a wake-up call, and the healthy, if you will, the healthy way to respond to that is individually, independently, to reflect, reason, communicate, decide what to do, and then do it. And that's an ongoing and iterative process in your life. And then while you're doing that, you should be able to articulate your reasoning, why you're doing these things. Because then you can talk to other people about them and maybe refine and amplify your understanding and actions. All right. In fact, this is the last sentence in that paragraph. In fact, your way of showing up does not work to such an extent or in such a manner that it puts into question your identity, your way of understanding you in the world. So this is not just a casual thing. This is an earth-shaking thing. Let's see. In my own life, I can remember I was in high school at the end of the Vietnam War, and there was a lot of talk about, going off to Vietnam and killing people. And I realized this is not a theoretical discussion. At some point it hit me, this is what the government expects me to do, me. And I started taking it very seriously. I spent a lot of time in the library reading, because I was very religious at that point. And I read, this did not add up for me at all. And I was reading a lot about it. And that's the kind of thing that Jaspers is talking about. Or when I graduated from college, I had studied economics in college, and I'd come up with my own approach. Well, it's not such a unique approach. I mean, it exists in the world, but it's kind of unique where I was studying, and it was a comparative economics, which was to try to understand all the different economic systems, like communism, socialism, market capitalism, and all the different variations of that. And I'd gotten a lot of strokes from professors and a lot of encouragement. And I went off to graduate school to study that and fell flat on my face because there was no interest or tolerance for that at the graduate level. And I had to learn econometrics and computer programs and all that kind of stuff. And so that did not work for me. And that was, I was really shaken in my identity at that point, and I kind of had to start again from scratch. So, I mean, those are just examples of what I think he's talking about. And I really did have to do all these things: reflect, reason, communicate, decide, and act on the basis of my experience. And I tried to come up with a way to understand it and explain it. All right. Or another one. Here's another. I'm just giving you examples. When the World Trade Center was attacked by the 2 airplanes and taken down, I thought that I'm just telling you honestly, I thought these people are trying to tell us something. What are they trying to tell us? We should listen. And that's not the way the US responded. So anyway, that's those are some instances where I was kind of shaken. All right. Such a life-shaking event creates the opportunity for existence as defined above. But such an event does not require you to pursue the opportunity to exist. It doesn't require you to do it. So let's call these challenges. You are challenged in a very fundamental way, and you can rise to the challenge, but you don't have to. You can just avoid it or disregard it or give into it. It's an opportunity when you're presented with these challenges. And here, this is my own take on it, because I think he uses the word situation instead of opportunity. And seizing the opportunity created by life-shaking events depends on your willingness to engage in your own individual, independent reflection, reasoning, communication, decision, and action. So to live existentially. All right. The next thing he talks about, well, I'm not sure I got all the words spelled right. Responsibility, existence, individual responses and responsibility. Human life is always being in a situation. So here, in some ways, he's talking a bit like Heidegger did, and they definitely had things in common. If you read the introduction to Time and Being, or Being and Time, the Heidegger says the only way we can't really know being, the only way we can try to understand it or to unveil it is to think about the type of being that we're most familiar with, and the type of being we're most familiar with is a human being, and the human being is always living in a situation. And so he goes off on that for a few hundred pages. He talks about, and he develops his vocabulary in that way. And here it is again. Human life is always being in a situation. You can change your specific situations, but you cannot change the fact that you will always live within a situation. So it's very situational. It's relationship oriented. Relationship of you with things, you with the world, and you with things and people. And in addition, your situation, this is key, is always different in at least some ways from others' situations. And that means your responses are going to be different. And your philosophy will be different. And this is a key point that it comes up later, that in science, there's a generally accepted fact that is true for everyone, valid for everyone. You know, it may prove to be wrong 3 centuries down the road, but everybody accepts it as the fact. Philosophy is not like that, is what Jaspers is saying. And again, he was a scientist. That philosophy is very different. You don't have a generally accepted truth. You have individual truths. And what you don't get a consensus on the facts, you get a consensus on mutual respect. All right, these individual situations evoke responses, but your response is not existential unless it involves your awareness of your personal individual responsibility for your response. So that's a key point, because the sense of responsibility doesn't come at the end. It comes at the very beginning of the decision process. When you're formulating an action, you need to appreciate from the very beginning that you are individually responsible. Even if you decide to join up with an institution, you are responsible for that decision to join up. And then he goes on here, an existential response cannot be dictated by an authority. You necessarily have responsibility for your decisions, even if the decision is to defer to the authority. Your responsibility arises from your inescapable situation as an individual. You do not cease being an individual by becoming a member of an organization. and then the last thing here, your response can change as your reflections and situation change. So not only does each individual can have his or her own valid response to life, but your valid responses can change over time as your situation changes. So that's focusing, there are some things that we all have in common, like this existential situation, individual responsibility, the opportunity to act individually, but he flagged some other things here as sources of philosophical reflection. I don't know if you agree with all these. So even though your situation is different, each individual situation is different, in some ways they're all the same. And one way in which your situation is the same is that we all will die. We all know that we will die at some undetermined date. According to Jaspers, this inescapable awareness has always shaken individuals and has always been a source of perennial philosophical reflection. He even wrote papers on the perennial philosophy, and others have too. But this is, that's probably not, not open to much disagreement. And it also plays into religions. Now the next paragraph, generalizing on other aspects of life, and this is one that might be open more to discussion. Of all the things that you could pick, Jaspers concludes that we all necessarily live at the expense of others, and we cannot live without struggle and suffering. According to Jaspers, the realizations of these necessary conditions of life have also always shaken individuals and also always led to perennial philosophical reflection. So these are also topics that philosophers have written about through the ages. This is kind of this, not everybody would agree that these, they might be, these might be true, that we all live at the expense of others and that we cannot live without struggle and suffering. But then others would say, I'm not sure I would pick those as the things to emphasize. But here they are. This is what he's picked. He thinks these are conditions of human life, and true for everyone, and he has decided to highlight them as opposed to several others. We could come back to this. This does touch a little bit on what Ocean was talking about. We necessarily live at the expense of others. So that's definitely something to think about. Okay, existence and freedom. Jaspers is sometimes called the philosopher of freedom, sometimes called the philosopher of possibility. So he definitely stresses freedom. Existence involves making decisions, and this sounds very much like the existentialism I was first introduced to when I was in my 20s. Existence involves making decisions with the awareness before you make the decision that you are an individual, that you have individual capacities, you have the capacity to reflect, decide, and act on your own, and that you inescapably are responsible for your actions, both to yourself and to others. And finally, avoiding decisions is always an option, but that's not existence. Just burying your head in the sand, deferring to others without doing so thoughtfully, this sort of thing is not existence. the awareness that you are an individual comes from the fact that you are a being in the world. In other words, you are simply one part of an entity made up of many parts, and that the parts move independently. The occasion for such an awareness is often an event when you are shaken in your understanding of yourself. You are made aware that you are only a part of the whole in a way that you had not appreciated. So the wake up to existence and the call to philosophy is based on this realization that you are free. All right, freedom and what he's called giftedness. A lot of the commentators I've read, they all seem puzzled and by this. Honestly, it doesn't seem that complicated to me. By Jaspers says we are gifted to ourselves. And what does he mean by that? As a human, you are constantly reminded of your separateness. So it's not, yeah, you have that first time you're shaken, but it's not going to be the last. The ongoing reminders of your separateness creates a capacity or causes you to reflect on your individuality as you live in the world. You're constantly reminded of your individuality. In this way, your initial awareness of your individuality is like an opening, which becomes a space for sensitivities and consciousness. So this event becomes a condition or a state of sensitivity and consciousness. And your sensitivities and consciousness are the result of your separateness. So it really is for everyone. Through these sensitivities, you become aware of your innate capabilities. So first of all, you become aware of your individuality. And once you're aware of you're an individual, you're aware of your capabilities. The capacities which you possess individually from your nature as a human. In other words, from being a human, without any development on your part. Freedom of existence comes in part from those capacities. It gives you the ability to act. So I'll read it again. Freedom of existence comes in part from those capacities when you realize that you do in fact rely and that you can rely only on those capacities in your lives. Capacities develop, you can rely on others. I mean, we could debate some of that, but the idea is there that you are given capacities that you did not acquire. You can go out and acquire some more, but even the ability to acquire more capacities is a gift that was given to you. So to the extent that you are aware that you are born with these capacities, rather than developing them entirely yourself, Jaspers often states that existence includes an awareness that you are gifted to yourself. So that's another thing about Jaspers is we talked about the difference between descriptive and prescriptive. There's also a difference between the unaware and the aware. If you are everybody is gifted. You're gifted, everyone's gifted to himself or herself. But people who live existentially are aware of the fact that they are gifted to themselves. And this changes the way they think, feel, it changes their lives. So as we saw on the previous slide, your freedom of existence is occasioned in part by your individuality and your capabilities, including reason, decisiveness, and action. The freedom of existence also comes from your actually making decisions using your own capacities. And this particular capacity he calls conscience, rather than the dictates of an authority. So here again, I think existence is for him fundamentally an individual activity. Focusing on how you express yourself. So the freedom of existence comes from focusing on how you express yourself in the world, rather than the extent to which you achieve any worldly success other than self-expression. So, the utilitarians and the pragmatists and all this, they're more into what is the actual consequence. You're responsible for the actual consequence. He is focusing on expression. Conscience and personal expression are also elements of the freedom of existence because, compared to the dictates of authorities and worldly success, which is based on fate and good fortune, conscience and personal expression are relatively free from external constraints. In other words, they are within your control. Conscience and personal expression are more within your control than the dictates of authority or achieving worldly success. And that is, the existential life focuses on conscience and personal expression. All right, freedom and redemption. This has to do with the fact that you make mistakes. Your freedom arises out of your awareness that you are an individual, that you possess certain capabilities, and that you can rely on those capabilities in your life. So that's a summary of the prior slide. Your freedom also arises out of your awareness that your existence focuses on who you are becoming, not on what you accomplish in the world. At the same time, who you are becoming necessarily expresses itself, plays itself out in and through the world. Accordingly, it might be fair to say that your intention, rather than the unforeseeable consequences of your actions, offers the better understanding of your existence. At the same time, existence is an iterative process which does have consequences in the world. It's an iterative process, always tentative, provisional, and incomplete. That's clearly Jaspers' view. But at the same time, your actions' consequences manifest themselves, and those actions, I could have written that in here, they are not tentative, provisional, or incomplete. They are concrete and final. And you cannot change those. So there, honestly, I could have explained this better. There, you need forgiveness, but you also have redemption because you can change. You can try to clean up the mess you made. That's one thing. But then you can change how you act in the future. So this is something, honestly, that I think Hannah Arendt explained a little better than Jaspers. It's something that she elaborated on in her work, The Human Condition. Existence, knowledge as an invitation to act. So far, we have seen that the freedom of existence comes from your individuality, your capabilities, listening to your conscience, and focusing on your self-expression. So again, that's from the past slides. At the same time, existence necessarily involves action in the world. As action in the world, according to Jaspers, existence is subject to the same two conditions as all other action in the world, which is knowledge and choice. For these purposes, knowledge is both an awareness of the alternatives available to you and the skill to pursue those alternatives, so practical knowledge. These two aspects of knowledge are related. An alternative is not really available unless you both know about it and have the skill to pursue it. Awareness and skill is the presence. Awareness and skill in the presence of alternatives creates opportunities. Again, he doesn't use the word opportunities. He calls it possibilities. So your decision, existence, your decision is your response to your knowledge. In addition to knowledge, choosing or decisiveness is another element of existence which is common to all types of action in the world. Jaspers refers to this choosing or decisiveness as the capacity which enables you to select one course of action when you know of more than one opportunity available to you. The German word is Willkür. Willkür can also mean arbitrariness, determination, courage, commitment, and perseverance. I put those in there because honestly, I think decisiveness and choosing are better words than Willkür. But the arbitrariness is useful, as we'll see later. Because reason is the thing that prevents arbitrariness from being harmful. As a human, you can create your life through your own decisions, but this path is not required. So again, existence is an opportunity. Existence is just a possibility available to you. According to Jasper, you have not fully lived. You have not fully used your human capacities or lived in accordance with your individuality unless you have made your own choices about who you are and will be, and until you are acted upon those choices. This element of Jasper's thinking may well be widely viewed as the essential element of existentialism. That's an editorial comment on my part. I think this is when a lot of people try to this is the understanding of existentialism, I think, for many people. So and then this is a key part of Jasper's work. And again, I think it really, at least on his work so far, it illustrates that this is not a comprehensive view of all life. He doesn't talk, for example, about developing habits at all. So in addition to knowledge and choice, two elements of all action, in order to be existence. So in addition to knowledge and choice, the action must be based on sound reasoning if it's going to be existence. In fact, you should be able to justify your action, explain why you have taken or are taking this action. I'll just say this is another, if you will, an improvement I would like to make in what I've read so far from Jaspers, and that is that I don't, this is the basis of his communications theory, which has been picked up by other philosophers after World War II, and I think really developed much more fully. There's a big difference between communicating before you do something and after you do it. And Jaspers doesn't seem to touch on that, at least based on the things I've read. Discussing your reasons, sound reasoning, and here he's talking, sound reasoning includes the ability and willingness to identify and articulate the reasons for your actions. This element of Jasper's philosophy, discussing reasoning, is the basis of communication philosophy. Habermas and Gadamer are two post-World War II communications philosophers. They've written about communications as well as other things. Another thing about Jasper's communications is he's suggesting you talk to other existentialists, other people individuals who are seriously trying to live reasonably. I don't think that's good enough. I think you should talk to the people who are involved, affected, and concerned by your decisions. And you should do that before you act as much as possible. And I don't see any of that in Jasper's work so far. Okay, so then we get into reading philosophy. Where possible, identifying sound reasoning also includes studying, discussing, and reflecting on the writing of philosophers, free thinkers from the past. This study, discussion, and reflection does not entail a deferral to history's philosophers in making your own decisions. It simply creates the possibility that your decisions will be better reasoned. All right, so that's existence. We haven't really gotten into philosophy at all, but that's already plenty of material. I don't know if anybody's still there or not. Are there any questions or comments?
There
James,
are 29 of us still here, Brian.
oh,
So
great.
you needn't worry. Yeah.
Oh, all right. We got
Yeah, I have a question
okay.
or statement. Can I chime in?
I hear let's see, Philip Khalid is on the I see as the first one. Can you unmute?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, is this Philip?
Yeah, this is Philip.
Okay.
I thought I was the third one. Anyway, this sounds like a bit of Heidegger. There are some portions here that I feel that he's sounding like Heidegger, like what he said about existence. I put it here in the chat box so I don't forget. Yeah, existence sounds like Heidegger's existence is imposed in thrownness. Do you think that there is there is a Heideggerian language here, or Heideggerian has a language of Jaspers, thrownness, and Heidegger's existence? And then the conditions and possibilities, it sounds like Heidegger also. Is that a hallmark of an existential thinking?
Well, I don't think they have the same vocabulary. They definitely at early in their careers, they had similar thinking. They were going to publish a magazine. I don't remember the name of it, but it was going to go off on these topics. So, and they were both pretty excited about it, but it did not materialize. So yes, they had very similar views, and I haven't really, I decided early on in putting this presentation together, I was not going to try to compare Heidegger and Jaspers or Heidegger with Jaspers with anybody else, because it gets to be impossible. So I think you're right, but I think we could spend a very long time discussing them. But I don't think they have the same vocabulary. I don't think that Jaspers likes Heidegger's vocabulary.
Okay. I just want to say that I don't know much about Karl Jaspers or Karl Jaspers, but I think he's a nice antidote to Heidegger. That's why I'm kind of excited with your presentation. Thank you for such a lovely presentation.
You're welcome. So if you weren't first, who was first? Let me see. Let me see if I can find it. David, can you help me out? Who's next?
Mason Hardman is next.
Okay.
Hey, so on the topic of giftedness and capabilities, so is that talking about like your innate skill set, like stuff that you're maybe naturally talented to?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Can I ask one more other question?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what is so he's very much focusing on freedom and basically working on oneself, trying to be as free as possible within one's community. And you're saying that your actions, before you act, you should communicate with people around you. So it's
That's what I said. He said communicate with basically other philosophically minded people.
Yeah. Yeah. But you're saying that it's probably better to do it for the people around you, right?
If you're going to do something, I think you should, to the extent possible, talk to the people you're going to do it. The people are going to be involved, affected, or concerned. If you talk to them before and reach some agreement with them, you're doing it with them. If you don't talk to them, there's a good chance you're doing it to them. And that's not a good look.
It's not a good look. So he's very community focused. But towards the end, you're saying, I think after World War II, he was talking to Heidegger or whatever, about what, and Heidegger said, gotta at least respect institutions and stuff, institutions that are, I guess, not exactly, they're not part of one's community and whatnot. Is there a tension there?
Well, I think that yes, there is a tension there. Absolutely. And I think in his earlier writings, he just didn't focus on it, or was more dismissive of it. And later on, I think he took it more to heart.
So,
and
no, sorry, continue.
He once wrote, and I don't remember what year this was in, that he gave, so it was before 1937, he gave lectures along the lines on the topics I've been presenting here. And one of his students came up to him. His student was a Catholic priest and said, yeah, we talk about all this stuff in seminary and we call it theology, not philosophy. And that was a revelation for Jaspers. He just had never, taken that on board as that there's some overlap between the individual issue, the issues of individuality that he's talking about here, and the teachings of organized religion.
Yeah, I guess with similar to Kierkegaard, is the more individualized kind of religious experience than to an organized religious institution, where I guess the church can say you got to do this, but that doesn't always gel with one's religious experience.
Yes, and there's also in the process of, I think, joining a church, it's he does say that being a member of a church is basically a group activity. Being a philosopher is an individual activity. And if you look at the way you become a member of the church, you tend to become a member of the church your parents went to, and supposedly become a convicted believer. And so it's not supposed to be by coincidence, but by conviction that you join the church. But it is quite a coincidence that everybody, or many people, join their parents' churches. And I remember I don't remember my baptism, but I remember the confirmation. And I enjoyed it. I learned a lot. But I wasn't really aware of the alternatives. And I did do the confirmation, which is supposed to be my mature embracing of the religion, and I really don't think it was that.
Yeah, I suppose like when theologians talk about this, it sounds very like, you know, on one's own focus. But if you're part of that institution, you kind of let it slip, and you kind of just let like the institutions kind of decide on how one should feel about that type of stuff.
Yeah, I guess, you know, in the end, Jaspers, and I think Kierkegaard in the end, he doesn't mind, they don't mind if you are a convicted believer, but if you're just a get along and, you know, go along and get along member of the church, I think they'd say that's not authentic.
Brian,
Yes.
could I ask you to stop share?
Okay. Oh,
Joseph's next, I think.
Good. Well, thank you for your presentation on Karl Jaspers.
You're welcome.